Hey everybody, welcome on our channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto got harem with Korra, Kuvira and Asami? Part 3. If you are new on the channel, don't forget to subscribe our channel and like the video too. So without wasting any more time, let's start the story. Alright, first things first. The vote. I think the outcome can be stated in an excerpt from perhaps the quintessential opinion from the reviews. As for the pairing, you've already got two girls in it. My vote is for you to add a third cause, why not? Plus Asami's hot guest. This pretty much sums up the majority of the reviews, except for a single review at the time of writing this chapter that said no to Asami's inclusion. I'm cool with that, some plans I had going forward will actually work a little better now, and it'll be interesting to see where my mind will take this story, as I truly up to this point hadn't been thinking of Asami in the story and its progression pretty much at all. There is one particular review I would like to address, and it is because I believe it is a misunderstanding that came about as a failure on my part as the author. Why is Naruto so scared of Kurama specifically? What did he do to him? The suspense is killing me. I would first like to point out that this response is not in any way negative towards the reviewer, and I simply wanted to address it, so don't feel bad or anything like that. I am unsure of where to take Kurama. But I do not see Kurama as a main antagonist, nor do I see him as anything more than a supporting character. He presents an interesting juxtaposition to Naruto as an Uzumaki, as well as a brutal but very efficient ally to have. He will be involved with the story rather extensively, and conflict will arise. Let's be real, Naruto wouldn't be okay with someone who goes around snapping people's spines, even if they are his family. Kurama has not done anything to Naruto. At this point in the story, Naruto and the main group around him, Korra, Kuvira, Mako, Bolin, Asami, do not know that Kurama is his family, and Naruto is extremely anxious and afraid of Kurama because of the information and stories that make up Kurama's image like a myth in Republic City. Kurama is also deeply tied to Naruto's inner conflict with a smile, because Naruto feels he is allowing himself to sink far further than he normally would, such as literally going into the opium information hub of Republic City, and Kurama is a physical symbol of this. In Naruto's mind, his association to Kurama is an affront to everything he believes himself to be, and everything he believes his parents want him to be, so he is naturally extremely nervous around Kurama for these reasons. Kurama, on the other hand, is an extremely complicated and interesting character, complete with his own trials and tribulations, as long gone as they are. I won't go into it here, but what I will say is that, as the author, Kurama is my personal favorite character in this story, and unfortunately if you do not like his character I am sorry, but he will be making appearances often. Again, I feel that this was not made clear enough, and I view that as a personal weakness as an author, so that is why I am addressing this. If you take too long, she will take more than she gives. Kurama. Kurama growled lowly to himself as he exited the meeting hall, staring at the skyline of Republic City, before reaching into his pocket and grabbing a lighter as well as a thin, white cigarette labeled menthol. Growling even as he placed it in his mouth, Kurama flipped open his lighter with a loud clunk and lit the cigarette, closing the metal lighter with an equally loud noise, and striding forward as smoke billowed up ever slowly from the end of the cigarette. He could feel lava running through his ways, fire spewing forth from each breath, even as he tried to quell it with the menthol. His body burned, and he found it impossible to not glare and grunt through breaths as he strode forward, his mind ping-ponging between trying to calm himself and trying to not go back and end the police chief for her words. The actions Kurama took, the writhing and vile acts he committed, were all for those he cared about. And Kurama cared about no one more than an Uzumaki, as little as he had been with the boy. He grit his teeth, the cigarette crumbling as it flopped over on the side of his mouth, though he just spit it out angrily as he stomped forward, a wide area being cleared around him, as his aura spoke of death and suffering for those that bothered him. For that woman to even insinuate that he had not done whatever he could, oh how he wanted to kill her. But he held back. Because she had helped the boy and inadvertently brought Naruto into Kurama's territory. Kurama still felt the pride swell within his chest as he remembered handing the boy everything on the man that had butchered his beloved Kushina. Kurama's eyes glowed dangerously orange as he strode forward, his thought swinging like a pendulum into the domain in which a blonde, blue-eyed man resided. Oh how he hated Minato. That pathetic, worthless, egotistical, arrogant, idiotic, Kurama had to restrain himself from exploding. It didn't matter anymore. Minato had done two things that made Kurama happy. He had made Kushina happy, and he had given the world Naruto. The thought of Naruto calmed Kurama as he continued to walk through Republic City, merely wandering in his thought. He knew it would be bad to teach the boy to do what he did. Even if it was in the boy's best interests, it would betray Kushina. And Kurama would never do such a thing. Ever. Uzumakis did not betray each other. It was simply impossible. But, he would nourish the boy. Help him. Guide him, even if passively. And, Kurama decided, even provide his protection to those the boy cherished. The boy had seen too much pain, and that thought burned Kurama's eyes until they dripped water to calm it. The man suddenly dropped down from a roof in front of Kurama, staring at him with intent eyes. "Out with it." Kurama growled, in a thoroughly bad mood. The man merely nodded at him. "Zolt's made a move. Unconfirmed damages." Kurama growled, his eyes narrowing as a grin stretched across his face. Stress relief came in many forms. "Where?" The man didn't reply, simply jumping up onto the roof accompanied by a grinning Kurama as they sprinted towards the location. Arriving, Kurama stopped grinning and glared from the rooftop even as a young boy dressed in fancy clothing spotted him, dropping the body of one of Kurama's men, clearly dead if the charred flesh and dried blood all over the empty street was an indication. "Ahahaha, here comes the man himself now. King Kurama, eh? You look like a bitch." Kurama growled, dropping down into the street and waving off the men that had gathered around him to help, the men instantly vanishing. The boy grinned, striding forward and snarling at Kurama. Kurama looked down at the body at his feet and his face became shadowed by his hair and he crouched down slowly, turning it over and lightly cascading his hand across the singed flesh of the man's cheek. The boy laughed. "Upset, eh? They all went out like pussies. Shitty group you've got if they can be killed by a 15-year-old. But then again, I'm not just any 15-year-old. I'm Lightning Bolt Vult. And my lightning's even stronger than my father's." Vult proclaimed, though he growled when Kurama ignored him, reaching onto the necklace on the body and snapping it off, rising up and allowing one eye to peek past the shadow of his hair. Zolt's kid, huh? Heh, knew he'd be too smart to pull some shit like this." Kurama raised the necklace and looked at it with a reverent eye, cherishing it with his motions. He read the name and his eyes hardened. "Lewis. You know, Lou here." Kurama tied the dog tag around his neck and tightened it, running his hand through his hair and glaring dangerously at Vult, who backed up slightly. "Lou's got 2 kids. Dead mother. Been in the game for a year now. Just to make sure his kids get food on the table and pencils for school. I've been paying him extra too, hell, even babysat his kids once. But you," Kurama started to stride forward and Vult backed up, though suddenly readied himself with a shaky grin, prompting Kurama's eyes to flash alive. "You didn't think about all that, did you? Because you wouldn't know. You'd have no way of knowing who to compensate. Who to take care of." Kurama continued to stride towards Vult with a murderous gleam in his eye. "You know, Republic City has been my city for nearly 30 years now. And you know what? You know what?" Kurama began to grin manically, his eyes flashing with a brief insanity. "Ahahahaha. You know what?" Kurama screamed at Vult, laughing out loud in an insane way. "I killed your mother, kid." Kurama suddenly stopped laughing with a deadpan, standing a few feet away from Vult and staring without emotion into the young man's eyes. It was quick. Painless. "She had," Kurama grinned as he saw the anger and grief on Volt's face, "scarlet eyes. I remember. Fine ass too." Kurama's canine sparkled in the sun as he stretched the left side of his face upwards into a snarling grin, staring at Vult in an almost euphoric aggression. But, that's not the funny part. You see, the funny part is," Kurama looked up, his eyes shadowed as they glowed, "I'm the only reason you're still alive. Zolt was a deadbeat back then. Had no job. I compensated him for a year until he got his shit together. But none of that matters now. None of it. Because you didn't know. And you didn't care. So now," Kurama's fists gained an orange tint to them as he smashed them together in front of him, grinning. "I get to kill you too." Vult growled, glaring at Kurama with a new form of seething hatred as he put his palm outward, streaks of lightning flashing between his thumb and fingers before he pointed at Kurama. "Kill him." As he finished, lightning flew out from his hand towards Kurama. A brilliant wave of light and heat, fully capable of killing someone at first touch. Like it had to Lewis. Vult grinned when he saw the attack connected, but suddenly his eyes widened and his mouth dropped as Kurama's smiling face revealed itself despite the electricity sparking about his body. He strode forward, each step weighty as his whole body leaned into them. "What? Thought that'd kill me?" The way Kurama's eyes were continuously lit up and then shadowed by the electricity sparking around his body drove a spear of very real, very crushing fear into Volt's chest. "Heh. That's a good joke. You're half right at least. It will kill something. But, well, it's you." Kurama extended his fingers outward and the lightning that had been trailing all around his body unleashed in an even larger wave than it had when it left Volt's hand. And when it connected, a web of electricity formed around a laughing Kurama as the bodies of Vult and his goons burned and charred, smoke billowing in the air as Kurama's eyes spasmed from the strength of his laughs. All the while, the mistress watched. Naruto walked slowly behind the group of girls as they strode forward ahead of him, watching their backs with jaded eyes as he meandered with them, a small distance having formed between them. His mind was running in a single direction, a sprint forward, as he watched their feet from his position behind them. He was tired. Fed up. His life since coming to Republic City had been so enriched, so filled with new and old things in a wonderful mix of nostalgia and excitement. But this was on a surface level. Deep within himself, Naruto was becoming aware of a toxic brew, ready to spill forward from his mouth and raise into the air, raining down its acidic waters upon himself and the people around him. Naruto no longer found himself seeing the smile wherever he looked, and for this he was grateful. Not because he viewed the delusions as a problem, but rather, when he did see the smile now, this mixture tried to surge upwards through his chest to melt the smile and turn it to a liquidy, steaming pile of flesh and bone. His blood churned into lava as it ran its course through his veins, and his heart no longer pumped on its own, instead fueled by the hand of Lucifer as it gripped his heart during these moments. Anger had become a mainstay where it had previously been a novel thought, like the rarely passing holiday. Monday became anger, Tuesday became anger, Wednesday became anger, Thursday was a day of relief, Friday became anger, Saturday became anger. And Sunday became a boiling point in which Naruto would spend his nights furiously looking over everything he had gathered, only to find that there was nothing new. Nothing. Naruto knew within himself that what was really beginning to be the cause of this seething anger was that he could do nothing about that dreadful smile that haunted his mind. That monster had escaped to the North Pole. Naruto knew where he was. Who he was. Naruto would not disgrace himself with thinking of the name. Because it did not matter. He knew where he was. But Naruto could not go there. Not yet. There was too much to worry about, too much to attend to in Republic City. And it burned his skin and freezed his eyes arctic to think about. His heart pounded with a desire to leave, his hands shook with a desire to tear, and his eyes pulsed with a desire to watch a waterfall of blood. But his mind restrained his desires and turned them inward, upon himself. He was angry at both himself and that man. Beyond angry. He had Korra. He had Kuvira. He had Tenzin, Pima, Jinora, Milo, Ikki. He had Mako, Bolin, and maybe Asami too. He had the Ichirokus. And yet he could not stop his desire to disgrace himself and lose everything that made him, him. Despite all of these thoughts, all of these reasons to stop himself and live happily ignoring the presence of a monster within the world, Naruto could not stop himself. His body yearned for the feeling of that man's blood cascading down his skin, it screamed for the feeling of his hands tearing into his stomach and pulling everything out. And he could not fool himself into thinking that the excitement in his chest was about whatever new technique Korra could learn or funny joke Milo could tell. He was so tired of it all. He needed a release. This aggression, this buildup, it was crushing his chest. And he needed an out. But for now, the girls were looking at him. Beside, do you want to get some food? Korra told him in an annoyed tone, crossing her arms and leaning her head to one side as she tapped her foot, waiting for his answer. Oh sure. Korra groaned at his answer, stepping forward and pulling him towards the girls, and threw an arm around his shoulder, leaning into his personal space despite their height difference. What's up with you today, huh? You should be happy, we're off that island. We're out exploring the city. Plus, Asami's just offered us food. Free food. Come on, cheer up. Korra beamed at him as she finished, gesturing out to the open expanse of city behind her as she did so. Naruto looked at her, the squint of her smile and the way her teeth gleamed in the light, and found relief drip into his chest. This drip doubled when Kuvira stepped forward and placed her hand on his shoulder with a small smirk. Asami watched awkwardly, though she smiled in what she hoped was a comforting manner. Naruto smiled and looked up at the sun. The mistress had vanished, but he did not need her right now, he decided. He had everything he needed. A small part of him told himself he was lying as a brief flash of a smile sparked through his mind. Alright, you've got me. I'll cheer up. Where are we going anyway? Naruto asked with a smile, looking to Asami as Korra untangled herself from around his shoulder and Kuvira stepped forward to be at his side. Oh, just this restaurant me and my dad go to occasionally, pretty good food I'll say. It's just down that way. Asami pointed behind her over her shoulder, and Naruto grinned at her, stepping forward and taking the lead, putting his arms behind his head. Alright. Naruto shouted out, grinning cheekily as the group walked, grinning as he looked at the people that passed by. He then dropped his arms and looked to Asami on his left. He leaned in closer to her in an overdramatic whisper, wiggling his eyebrows as he looked at Korra and Kuvira quickly before leaning back over to whisper, Korra said this would be free. Asami giggled as he said that, though he was more serious than she probably thought he was. Korra and Kuvira looked over and just shook their heads before returning to talks of sparring and airbending. Asami settled down and looked into Naruto's eyes with an amused smirk. But of course, a woman pays for her guests, no. She whispered back at him with a tone of humor, and Naruto bit his lip, looking up and thought. I hope so, well me and Korra don't have jobs, and I kinda don't want to make Kuvira pay. Naruto explained sheepishly, rubbing the back of his head. He had missed the humor in her reply, but Asami chalked that up to Naruto seriously being worried about paying, which was true. She sighed, but nonetheless returned a kind smile to the boy. "Don't worry, I really will pay for it. Money's not an issue," she explained and watched as Naruto nodded in a relieved way, looking forward and bobbing his head side to side in thought. "Though, why don't you and Korra have jobs? I thought for sure you'd have at least pro-bending for money, right?" Naruto looked at her with wide eyes before settling them and looking forward. It's complicated. I was only playing in that game because of an injury to their waterbender. Korra took my spot actually, but I don't think she plans on taking the money for the games. Her teammates, Bolin and Mako, need the money more than we do. Korra's a complicated topic," Naruto offered, though Asami giggled when Korra leaned forward and looked at Naruto quizzically through the corner of her eye. "Are you bad-mouthing me?" Korra stated slowly, her tone low and intimidating. Naruto sweat quickly, whipping his hands up in a placating motion. No, Asami asked why we don't have jobs. I was worried about her paying for all of us." Korra nodded, grinning at him cheekily. "Oh, I know, I heard everything. I just like messing with you." Asami laughed as Naruto's face faltered and Kuvira chuckled lowly in amusement. As the smiles and small chuckles faded, a thought occurred to Kuvira, the girl turning to Asami with curiosity in her eyes. "The restaurant we're going to wouldn't happen to be the Teretsu, would it?" Kuvira asked, and Asami turned to her with raised brows while Naruto and Korra watched, mouths open in curiosity. "It is? How do you know?" The excitement in Asami's face made Naruto smile, while Kuvira smiled lightly for another reason. "Saiyan and Badr Jr. will be headed there soon. Maybe we'll get to see them," Kuvira explained, thinking fondly of practically her family. Asami looked confused and Kuvira elaborated kindly. "Saiyan's practically my mother and she's the leader of Zaofu." Asami smiled in response, turning back to the path they were walking, but Naruto strode on over to Kuvira with his lips puckered out in a questioning look. "Who's Badr Jr.?" he asked slowly, narrowing his eyes comically at Kuvira to distract himself from the way his chest passively bubbled every few seconds as he forced down his writhing anger. Kuvira looked at him with a brow raised before smirking. Don't worry, he won't cause too much trouble. He's Saiyan's son, a real quiet type. I've known him since we were kids. Good guy, a smart one too," Kuvira offered, looking back to Naruto as he digested what she said. He grinned at her and squinted his eyes in a cheeky manner. "You like him, don't you?" he whispered at her, and Kuvira, instead of blushing or even laughing, groaned and then shoved Naruto roughly as she rolled her eyes. "Oh no. Badr's been trying to make not so subtle moves at me for a little while now, and it's just awkward. He's practically a brother to me, and that'd just be weird. It's pretty annoying, and even Saiyan has started to feel bad for me, and he's her son." Kuvira's groans of annoyance sparked a little drip of relief into Naruto's chest for a brief moment before it evaporated in the magma that was the anger sitting in his gut. He looked at her, nodding, before smiling. "We'll get along great. That man is allowed to walk about Republic City like a coyote because his monster strength isn't his strong suit. The man's a practical genius, good with people. Knows what to look for. He's been covering his shit up for decades, and not a single damn lackey of his is willing to testify against him. Not even out of fear. He just instills loyalty like I've never seen. Lin Bifong to Saiyan Bifong." Kurama grimaced as he pulled off the barely there jacket from Vult's dead body, the piece of cloth disintegrating into ash at his touch, until all that remained was a tiny piece of the cloth. As men swarmed around the clearing and cleaned everything up at a rapid pace, Kurama inspected the cloth with a bored eye. It wasn't anything special, considering the boy was wearing a replica of his father's suit built of worse materials, but it did mean something to Kurama as he grinned, tucking in the cloth in the collar of his suit, proudly allowing the pendant he had taken from Lewis's dead body to gleam atop the cloth like a pedestal. At least he could bring something home to those kids. Lucy and Luke would be devastated, and Kurama wasn't looking forward to seeing them wander the streets. "Everything's cleaned up, sir. Should we send word to the Triad?" One of Kurama's men questioned as he stood beside the man, staring down at the very few remaining pieces of ash as they waved about slightly on Kurama's palm. Kurama stared at the ashes, his eyes hardening. "No. Zol probably already knows. But, call for a meeting. The little boys need to know they aren't allowed to even look at Naruto. I'll tear down this whole city if they touch him," Kurama ordered, his eyes maintaining their steel quality as he thumbed the ashes softly. The man nodded, despite the murderous aura around Kurama. He'd been around it for over 5 years, he was used to it. "Everyone? Including the rays?" he questioned, and Kurama turned to look at him, dropping the ashes as a light shadow was cast over his face, though the man could still see the violet steel of his eyes. "Everyone. The rays, the 13s, and especially the Triad. If even one of them don't show up, I'll end their entire operation within the hour." Kurama's growl sounded far more guttural than the man was used to, but he nearly nodded and sped off to begin organizing the meeting. It seemed King Kurama was going to exercise his right to pass laws once more. As Kurama stood there, he felt her hands drift across his chest, tracing a little swirl mark on his shoulders as she floated away. He narrowed his eyes, glaring even as his body flared up, his skin glowing orange for a brief moment. Naruto grinned awkwardly as he pulled lightly at the collar of his light blue shirt, looking around the fancy restaurant with nervous eyes. "Hahaha, Asami. Did you mean to come here?" Naruto asked the girl, though she ignored him as a suited man stepped forwards towards their group and nodded his head in respect. "Always a pleasure, Ms. Asami. Right this way." His eyes trailed across Asami's group before turning around, his arms folding in the small of his back as he strode across the expanse of velvet floors and silky white table covers. Naruto rubbed the back of his head awkwardly as he followed the group from a medium distance behind them, grinning nervously as the clearly high-class patrons trailed his figure with narrowed eyes that spelled out their dissatisfaction with him. Coughing lightly, Naruto stumbled when he noticed that the group stopped. "Whoa," Korra mumbled, her eyes stars as she looked at the regal purple booth lined with gold. She reached out and grasped a table cover, even as Asami laughed and sat down, as if she had just walked into a chiraku. Naruto gulped, taking a seat beside Kuvira in the booth with Korra next to Kuvira and Asami across from Naruto, and sitting next to Korra in the odd semi-circle booth around the table. "How'd you get a reservation here?" Korra practically begged, grabbing onto Asami's shoulders and shaking her with desperation, while Asami openly laughed, shaking her head and waving her hands in amusement. No, I own the restaurant." Asami stopped laughing to stare with an amused eye at the group's reactions. Korra's mouth dropped open as her eyes widened dramatically, Kuvira's brows raised, but she maintained her composure, and Naruto was too busy looking around nervously. "You own this place," Korra screamed, and Naruto gulped and grinned shakily as the other patrons openly glared at his table. He waved, but they huffed with a haughty look and turned away from. Shaking his head, Naruto turned to the conversation and nearly chuckled at Korra's face, but the crushing aura of the restaurant was forcing his words to stay in his throat. Asami looked at Korra with a nearly annoyed look, shaking her head. "Yes, you didn't catch my last name, did you?" Asami asked in an annoyed tone, looking at Korra from the corner of her eye as she looked down in exasperation. Korra seemed confused. "No. It's Sato. As in, Satomobiles. Making sense now." Asami explained in a sarcastic tone, and Korra's face immediately flashed in realization. "Ooh yay. That makes sense." Naruto sighed and shook his head at Korra's antics before allowing his eyes to bounce around the restaurant. Kuvira noticed and tapped his shoulder, and he jumped a little, looking at her with wide eyes before exhaling heavily, shaking his head. "Ah. Gudgeez, Kuvira, you gotta be careful. You." Naruto breathed out, chuckling at her to cover up how nervous he was. Everyone noticed though. "What's wrong, Naruto?" Asami asked, her brows scrunching up slightly in concern. Naruto looked at her and then to Korra before sighing and shaking his head. "Nothing, just I've never been in a fancy place like this. I'm just a little nervous is all." Naruto told them, rubbing the back of his head with an awkward grin. Asami chuckled, Kuvira nodded, and Korra looked down in an exasperated manner. "Oh come on. I haven't been in here either, but just look at this place. It's great." Korra exclaimed, waving her hands around the group and towards the grand restaurant they were seated in. Naruto followed, looking around, and found that his nervousness did get relieved slightly as he genuinely took in the grandeur of the place. "See? There's nothing to worry about, we've even got the owner sitting right next to us. We're fine. We're better than fine, we're great." Korra's exclamation was followed up with a grand gesture of her hands, and Naruto found himself smiling despite the nervousness in his chest that was slowly being eaten by the poison beneath it. Alright, I get it. What kind of food they got here anyway?" Kurama stared at the small room from his chair, left leg crossed over the right one as he lounged in a leisurely fashion, inspecting the blackened areas underneath his nails. He flicked a piece of ash off of his index and watched as three men entered the room. The first was a very clearly angry Vult, but Kurama's eyes flashed joyously as he watched a man physically restrict himself from lashing out at the man sitting in the chair. Kurama's grin appeared, his eyes following Vult as the man sat down, glaring at Kurama, while his body sat in a respectful position. The other two men, one with vibrant green hair and black eyes and another with simple brunette hair and glasses, sat down in the other two chairs. The men formed a diamond within the room, and Kurama's eyes flashed as he sat his leg down and leaned forward, linking his fingers together and staring at the men. "You've called us here. What for?" The man to his left, the brunette in glasses, stared stoically at Kurama and pushed up his glasses, sitting upwards in a rigid form. Kurama's eyes flashed over to him, and his grin stretched a slight bit at the way he could see a shiver run through the man's form. "I've called you three here, Amon, because I have to lay down a new law. Kurama hid the smile on his face as the green-haired man groaned, sitting back lazily in his chair and glaring at Kurama. "Fuck you and fuck your rules, Kurama. I'm gonna take this fucking city from you one day, you old fuck." The man's confident tone made Kurama's eyes sparkle with euphoria. "That'd be a cold day in hell, Ryu. Say some shit like that again and I'll cut your family tree down." Kurama growled, staring directly into Ryu's eyes and grinning maliciously as the younger man jumped up out of his seat and put his arms in front of him defensively. "Yay, hahaha, I'd love to see you take this fucking city from me when I can get you shaking by looking at you." Beep. Ryu huffed, sitting down quickly and glaring as his face reddened slightly. Zolt's face had become stone as he stared at Kurama. "What is this about? I have a funeral to plan." Kurama's grin lowered at the physical pain heard from Zolt's voice. Kurama stared directly into the man's eyes and just looked into them. The myriad of emotions, both aggressive and depressing, intoxicated Kurama. "The boy did it to himself, Zolt. Killed my men. I wasn't going to shut up. You don't think I know that my own boy's an idiot? God, just shut up." Zolt glared at Kurama, his throat enlarging with the force of his will, restraining himself from jumping at Kurama and falling to his death. Kurama merely nodded and then untangled his hands, leaning back in his seat. "As I said, a new law is getting laid down today. You see, there's a boy that's just arrived to Republic City. Kurama snapped his fingers and held his hand out, and immediately a painting-sized portrait of Naruto was placed into it, the man holding it up for the other men to see. "Special." Kurama finished, narrowing his eyes as he looked at the men. "The fuck's this gotta do with some pansy like him?" Ryu asked, and Kurama openly glared, snarling. "If you speak again, I'm ripping your throat out. That goes for any of you. Badmouth the boy and I end your operations in the city and build a new cemetery out of your hideouts." Kurama's glare intensified, his finger pointing at each of the three men before he settled down, breathing slightly. "The boy's name is Naruto Uzumaki. Kurama set the portrait down so that it rested on his chair and left his hand on the painting as he stared into it. "My nephew." Kurama's eyes briefly glanced at each of the men, narrowing his eyes at the way their eyes seemed to focus up a bit more at the revelation. So, Kurama raised his head and allowed his full aura to wash upon the men, each one of them visibly tensing and attempting to stay upright. Kurama stood, allowing the light from the room to shadow his eyes as they glowed a mix of violet and orange. "If anyone in this city touches him, talks about him, looks at him, hell, even if one of you three or even a grunt think about him, heh, well, the glow in Kurama's eyes began to glow a much more intense orange. I'll kill all of you. You'd better prepare for war." The Kurama breathed in as the anger from the thought of a dead Naruto flaring throughout his system. Moment Kurama grunted out weightily, his aura getting heavier. "Something happens to him. Because, Kurama staggered forward, grasping at something invisible in front of him as he glared at the men. "I will be coming. And I won't stop coming until you're—" Kurama raised his right hand and swung it down fiercely. "Ancestry is erased from history." Kurama threatened, snarling at the man and gesturing his head backwards. "Ha, get them out of here before I lose my shit." Kurama mumbled breathlessly, satisfied as the practically paralyzed men were quickly grabbed by Kurama's men and ushered out of the room. Kurama shook his head, calming down his breathing with a small exercise of willpower before he caught a glimpse of Naruto's portrait. Kurama stared at it, clasping his hands behind his back and crouching down to stare at the boy's face, narrowing his eyes. In the photo he was wearing his usual clothing. Light blue, sleeveless shirt, wool furs at his waist that cascaded down over his thighs, and baggy, dark blue pants to finish it off, excluding the boots on the boy's feet. He shakily unraveled his hands and slowly reached his right hand outwards, gently cascading it down the photo until it reached the pendant that shined in the middle of Naruto's chest. Kushina's pendant. Kurama restrained himself from the surge of murderous intent that very nearly boiled over. He wanted so badly to kill that man. To punch out a space for him in a concrete wall and shove him there, forcing his own hand into that filth's chest to pull apart its ribsage and grasp firmly around the man's heart, pumping it with increasing force until it popped as that pathetic piece of dogshit, of manure, of filth, of Kurama breathed. In his vision, that trash would watch as his heart popped in Kurama's hands, the tissue splattering across his skin as blood spewed everywhere. Kurama licked his lips as that euphoric taste of copper ghosted over his tongue. But, he couldn't kill the man. It wasn't that he physically couldn't or that the man was hidden. He knew where the man was, as did Naruto now, but it was not his jurisdiction. Kurama would gladly take the mantle, the responsibility, of ending whatever shriveled up, worthless excuse of a soul the man who had butchered his beloved Kushina had, but it ultimately fell to Naruto. It was Naruto's job. His glory. His vengeance. To deny the boy his practical birthright would go against everything Kurama stood for. What he lived for, since he had nothing else. And that particular thought had brought a boiling ocean of hatred to the forefront of Kurama's eyes as he glared past Naruto's portrait. Zolt. He'd seen the intent in that idiot's eyes. That little spark of planning, the little gleam of rebellion. Of murder. Kurama knew it well, for it was a permanent feature of his own eyes. The man clearly, at the very least, wanted to do something in regards to Naruto. It did not take a genius to figure out that Zolt wanted to butcher Kurama's only remaining family. The last real Uzumaki. The last full one, the one who still held her favor. Kurama stood, pacing around the room. That gleam was very troubling to Kurama. On one hand, Zolt was a perfectly sane man that had no plans to oppose his king, his Satan. Kurama knew that Zolt knew he'd fail. He'd die the instant he tried to start. Kurama had eyes and ears in the damn ground, in the walls, the ceilings, the sky, the damn water. There was nowhere in Republic City that Kurama didn't have ears in. But, on the other hand, Zolt was a father. A grieving one. Kurama understood more than anyone the lengths one could go to for family. His hands were still stained. Sighing heavily, Kurama crouched down in front of the portrait and continued to study it as his mind ran rampant. The mistress, as fickle and greedy as she was, laced her arms around his forearms in a sort of web and stroked the skin through his suit sleeves gently. Kurama growled lowly to himself, glaring at her ethereal image as it waved about in front of his face. She appeared to frown, the corners of her mouth dipping in a dainty fashion, while her brows scrunched up. He watched as she began to float away, unraveling her arms from around his and floating upwards away from him. As she left, Kurama held a fleeting thought that he smelt blood. For a brief moment, Kurama continued to stay on his knees, arms limp as he stared at the ground. His mind wandered the path he had taken in life, what he had done. The weight of the blood on his hands was too heavy for even him to lift. A knock at the door behind him stirred him. "Sir," Kurama turned around to stare at his follower, and his eyes widened a fraction at the man standing beside him before a grin settled onto his face. "Leave us." Kurama's command was met with shuffling feet and the rapid closing of the door as he stood, groaning slightly at the way his joints popped before he stretched his back, stopping to stare at the man with extreme joy in his eyes, grinning in the trademark Kurama smirk. Well, if it ain't Amon." Kuvira's eyes drifted as she leaned on her left hand, watching the way Asami and Korra talked excitedly between each other, and then drifting her eyes over to Naruto as he sat at her side, staring down at the tablecloth aimlessly. He appeared to be thinking. Kuvira wanted to ask him what about, but she restrained herself in favor of examining his features. Her eyes had always been drawn to his own. Their color had not been matched by any other, even the avatar at her side could not boast such vibrantly blue eyes as Naruto. And they had this interesting quality about them. Change. Kuvira had met many people in her short life, and none had such clarity of emotion in their eyes as he. The normal color, that of the blue sky, grew brighter with the gleam of his eye, acting as the cloud within its own skyscape whenever he seemed to be genuinely happy or excited. Like he had been at Ichiraku Sushi. Other times, like now, when he seemed and thought his eyes seemed to bleed a little violet outwards from his pupil. It was very slight, and she had only noticed it twice before now, but it was there. The phenomenon intrigued Kuvira to no end. There was a third instance of change within those spherical eyes. Negativity made the sky rain and turned to ice on the ground, deeply darkened and sharpened. Kuvira had teased the idea within her own speculation that his eyes could be used as knives. The ice that Naruto could conjure up from, quite literally, thin air with his bending, did not hold a candle to how cold his eyes could get. Could not match the clarity, the sharp edge to them. Kuvira lied to herself when she told herself it did not unnerve her. Not even in hardened veteran soldiers did she see such an edge to a person's eyes. Nevertheless, this edge became a quality to Naruto's eyes that drew Kuvira in. No matter how she felt or what was happening, Kuvira found that she could, rather dangerously easily, fall into the sky of Naruto's eyes and drift along, weightless. While his eyes may be his most curious quality, Kuvira could appreciate the other qualities about his appearance. The most obvious being his sun-dipped hair. Kuvira had seen the way Naruto's head bobbed within crowds, simply because it looked as if the sun had given the earth a child, a replica. The spiky silk threads that made up his head of hair looked to be soft as a baby's bottom, and Kuvira at many points had to stop herself from reaching to caress his head out of curiosity to see if their feeling lived up to their appearance. There were other qualities. The line of his jaw, the bridge of his nose, even his brows all held a certain soft edge to them that Kuvira found appealing. Naturally, being a bender made his physique pleasantly fit and his form held a certain litheness to it that Kuvira enjoyed. She caught her thoughts and told herself it was all ambient observations. Closing her eyes and breathing in softly, Kuvira opened them to find the pleasant surprise of Saiyan and Badr Jr. entering the building near the front. She smiled despite herself and stood up, indicating to Naruto through a gesture that she needed to leave the booth. "Oh, sorry. Where are you going?" She turned at his question and smirked cheekily. Cyan's here, might as well invite her on over, right? Kuvira asked, Moreso towards their hostess as she looked over to Asami, who was drawn from her conversation with Korra and looked over to her with an O on her face. Sorry, Asami hesitantly replied, puffing her cheek out awkwardly. Kuvira smiled despite the obvious intrusion and turned around to greet Cyan with a smile and a wave. Cyan. Hey. Kuvira exclaimed happily, jogging over to the older woman and groaning pleasantly as she hugged the practical mother in her life. Oh Kuvira. What are you here for? Don't tell me you left Korra for some date, now did you? Cyan teased, smiling as Kuvira looked annoyed and placed her hand on her hip. Just kidding, I know you take Korra with you of course. Cyan openly laughed at the way Kuvira's face managed to somehow get even more annoyed. No. Obviously not. We are being treated to lunch by the Sato heiress, actually. Kuvira smirked at the way Cyan's brows flew up and her mouth dropped open. No. Way. You're getting free food. Badr Jr. behind Cyan groaned at the fact that Cyan cared more about free food than the spirits above Sato heiress. Regardless, Badr Jr. smiled as he looked up and saw Kuvira, though it faltered only slightly when she seemed to ignore him in favor of grinning in a beepy manner to Cyan. Yep. Damn right I am. And Kuvira leaned him cheekily, her hand raising up to her cheek as she whispered dramatically, you want some? Cyan's grin told Kuvira all she needed to know. I wish to have a word, King. Amon's gravelly voice beat itself into Kurama's ears in an attempt at dominance. Kurama found he enjoyed the mystery man's confidence. The word huh. Kurama's eyes widened in a joyous manner as his brows rose up, wiggling in thought as he stared at the man. The two men stared at each other until Amon's head lowered slightly, his hood shadowing the upper portions of his mask. Tell your other men to leave as well. Kurama's eyes narrowed ever so slightly and he snapped his fingers. Instantly, 5 men who had hidden within the room crawled out from various spaces and left the room. Kurama felt his muscles tense in preparation as the energy within his body began to stir. Amon had been the second man to ever notice their presence. The puzzle piece had been placed in Kurama's palm. What's this word you've got for me, You've piqued my curiosity. Whether that's a good or bad thing for you is up to you, Amon. Kurama's growl was far more guttural and dominant than Amon could ever hope to achieve, and seeing the radical leader's chest deflate that fraction of a centimeter brought pride to Kurama's eyes. And yet another piece fell into his palm. You are a non-bender, are you not? If you are, my word should only be so obvious. Kurama's grin stretched across his face as he backpedaled with weighty, deliberate steps until he slumped loudly into his chair, leaning into a terrible posture for his back and resting his hand regally on the armrest. I am no fool, Amon. And neither are you. You're smart, I can tell. No one makes it in this room if they are a fool, and not a single damn person has ever managed to be in my city without me knowing everything about them. So, that being said, Kurama leaned forward slowly, his eyes narrowing as a light orange glow briefly emanated from them, his fingers lacing together in front of his face. Tell me exactly what your plan is. Because, being as smart as you are, you know that taking away everyone's bending will only destroy this world. Kurama watched as Amon's eyes gained a calculative glint to them, and his eyes mirrored the action. This confrontation seemed to be shaping up to be a match of wit. How so? Being the knowledgeable man you are, you will know what I stand for. What I teach the people of this city, and eventually the world. Bending brings war where peace may bring prosperity. Amon's arms flashed out to his sides as he finished, though his head remained as a wall in front of Kurama, the pair's eyes locked to each other. Pupil met pupil even as her eyes contracted and relaxed regularly. Faces twitched slightly, though Kurama could only guess if Amon's did as well. To say that bending does not bring benefit is blatantly wrong. We rely on bending for everything around us. Water benders purify the ocean so we may drink it, earth benders construct our buildings so we may sleep peacefully, and fire benders generate our electricity so we may continue to advance as a civilization. And, Kurama smiled cheekily even as Amon's eyes narrowed dangerously behind his mask, air benders sit around and preach ideals they barely follow. Kurama's grin dropped as fast as it had appeared, his fingers acting as a rest for his head as he continued to stare at Amon, who seemed to be contemplating his response. With the rapid advance of technology, the practical need for benders is lessening by the day. Benders are no longer leaders of their industries, take the Sato Corporation for an example. I'd wager to say that even you are an example of non-bending prowess. Look at all that you have built, can you honestly say to me that a bender would have been able to do the same? Kurama narrowed his eyes. Amon could be a damn good manipulator if this was how he spoke on a normal basis. To a man such as Kurama, however, this meant nothing. It is good to see that both of us have our secrets in this room. I was a bender at one point, boy. Kurama reveled in the pure shock and widening of Amon's eyes. And, had I retained my ability to bend, I would have only taken Republic City twice as fast as I had. You are foolish to think a bender cannot accomplish what a non-bender can. But Kurama leaned back, his eyes maintaining their unwavering observance of Amon's own, Kurama's left hand reaching out as if he were looking at his nails. Perhaps I can let it pass as a misphrasing. What you meant to say is that benders lack the drive of non-benders. It is only natural, life comes easier to a bender, normally. Regardless of phrasing, the point stands. Non-benders can and do achieve far more than benders, and non-benders are at a constant disadvantage. I seek equality. I do not seek to take away individuality or skill. But, sacrifices must be made for equality. Surely you know of sacrifice. I am sure we both know of the trials one must face to achieve their goals, yes? Despite the very obvious smile that Kurama could practically smell on Amon's face, Kurama's own remained stone, before a subtle snarl briefly flashed up the left side of his face. You talk of equality and yet you don't even know your own place. You don't even know who you're speaking to, do you? We are on two completely different levels, Amon, and for you to sit here and speak to me as an equal is a pathetic attempt to sway me towards your goals. Clearly, you need me far more than I need you. Kurama's chest swirled around in euphoria at the malicious anger that began to swirl around in Amon's eyes. That's preposterous. I am here to ensure your how many bodies? Kurama interrupted Amon by standing quickly, his face shadowed as the light from the ceiling beamed behind his head. Amon looked up and to his credit, he did not react to Kurama's imposing figure. What? Bodies? Humor me, I am confused. I asked. Kurama stepped forward, leaning down until his nose was mere inches away from Amon's mask. How many bodies? How many deaths? How much blood stains your hands? Kurama watched as Amon's eyes widened behind his mask and he backed up an inch. None. This is a peaceful revolution. Amon shouted out angrily, as if he had been disrespected and slandered. Kurama's face remained stone as he stood, hands latched behind his back. His jaw flexed. I had 84 bodies on my hands by the time I was 14. Kurama's words slammed into Amon like a truck and the man began to squirm in his seat as Kurama continued to beam down upon him with glowing orange eyes. You and I are not equals. You know nothing of sacrifice. Of trials. Of pain. Even of duty. Responsibility. You're a child playing a god's game. I can see it in your eyes. You have placed yourself upon a pedestal higher than humanity. Kurama paused as Amon's hand raised up towards him and he felt his blood seize within his veins. He watched as Amon rose slowly, defiance and anger flashing in his eyes. Steadily, euphoric joy and accomplishment began to shine within Amon's eyes. Kurama merely continued to watch, unmoved even as his blood's motions were not his own. I will start with you. My new world, brought about by revelation, does not have a place for monsters within the bodies of men. You say that I am a child playing a god's game, but you are a monster playing a man's sport. Amon glowered, glaring from his mask as Kurama stiffly stood in front of him. I will continue to let you play this game of yours in my city. Kurama spoke calmly, stepping forward as his skin glowed orange. Amon's eyes widened exponentially as he began to run to the door, tripping and falling over, rolling onto his back to stare with wide eyes as Kurama strode forward towards him. I knew you'd be a bender. I just knew it. A real non-bender would never have put himself on a pedestal. To think you'd be a bloodbender, just like a certain Kurama grinned dangerously as the puzzle seemed to fall in place, completed. Criminal. Amon's eyes began to shake, his body following suit as he tried to push himself through the wall. And, now that I know a little bit more about you, I'll say something. Truthfully, from the bottom of my heart, Kurama crouched down, his eyes low and narrow, as he looked into the pure horror and fear within the radical leader's eyes. He reached out, watching as the man shook and screamed while avoiding it, but Kurama grasped his shoulder roughly and forced Amon to look at him. An absolutely predatory and dominant grin slowly stretched across Kurama's face. Welcome to Republic City. Minato had seen him coming. But, this was Republic City. As much as the news had wanted to throw around statistics and stories, Republic City was still one of the safest cities on the planet. Sure, the unfortunate death of Aang had caused a spike of crime, but it had been 5 years since then. Things had calmed down. So when Minato saw a man trailing behind his family, he did not assume the man meant harm. Minato had been optimistic. The man obviously knew who the family was, for he targeted Kushina first. She could not bend the wind's water before he grabbed her wrists, pushing them up above her head and heaving his knife into her gut. Whatever resistance she had tried to build up had been torn down as her skin split and her muscles gave way to the metal. The man did not grin as he felt her warm blood cascade across his hand. He dropped her wrists, watching as they limply fell to her sides. Minato screamed, running over to Kushina and trying to stop the man, but the man had been prepared. Minato was not the fighter Kushina was. He was an engineer. The man sidestepped and watched as Minato fell forwards onto his face. Not taking his time for granted, the man grinned as Kushina's screams grew louder and louder as he withdrew the knife, watching as the little groove near the tip pulled out her intestine, like it had been designed to. She'd never recover from this. He watched as the rest of her stomach followed. His grin would not leave now, even as Minato rushed him and managed to grab hold of the hand gripping the knife, pushing it outward and trying to overpower the man. His grin gained a sinister darkness to it, bringing his knee up to collide with Minato's ribcage, killing off his strength and sending the blonde man down onto his back. "I would let you live, you stupid motherfucker. But now, tsk. The man launched the knife into Minato's chest, pulling it out before stabbing again and again. The police report would officially state 13 stab wounds. Naruto would remember upwards of 20. The man was breathing heavily as he finished, clearly tired from the mutilation he had enacted. Crouched on Minato's body and covered in blood, the man smiled. He stared at the body beneath his knees, though he felt a cold breeze at his side, prompting him to look to his left. His grin stretched and morphed viciously as he stared at a dead-eyed boy who was staring at him, standing perfectly still. He said nothing, striding forward and looking into the boy's eyes. Hollow. He liked that. The boy didn't cry in the face of his parents dying like he expected most children would. Standing a few feet away from the boy, the man continued to merely smile at the boy. He watched as the boy's eyes contracted and relaxed sporadically, his eyes shaking uncontrollably. The thin line between fear and anger made the man question which side of it the boy had fallen to. He heard the blood on his blade drip onto the ground before the breeze returned, carrying with it icicles in the air. His brow raised, but his grin returned in the face of the cold front. The boy's brows began to furrow in anger as tears began to form in the corners of his eyes, but the man's grin stayed. Police sirens rang above him, and he smiled at the boy. He suddenly dashed forward, kneeing the boy's face and knocking him out. "Tough luck, kid, probably would have been better for you had I killed you. Just makes tonight, hehehe, that much better to know I get to leave some kid alone on the streets. Heh." The man spoke to the boy even as he was out cold and dashed away in the alleyway. Kurama would later give the police his details, through a frothing mouth and guttural screaming. Lin Bifrong had learned to fear the man in the weeks to follow. Korra smiled awkwardly as she watched Kuvira return with Cyan and some man she had never met before. Though she felt uncomfortable in their presence, Korra wouldn't be mean. She knew Cyan briefly, and Kuvira seemed to be rather familiar with them, so Korra's only real problem with their presence was that this little outing was supposed to only be their little group, thanks to the wonderful Asami sitting at her side of course. "Hey guys, I know you two already know her, but Asami, this is Cyan Bifong, leader of Zaofu." Asami waved as Cyan grinned joyously at her as Kuvira gestured to her with a smile, "And this is her son Badr Jr." The rest of the group waved, though Badr Jr. merely nodded respectfully. "Is it cool if they have lunch with us?" Kuvira asked, and Asami just nodded, scooting further to the edge of the booth to make room, Korra following a little reluctantly. She watched as Naruto got up, letting Kuvira enter first, then Cyan, and finally Badr Jr. before he sat himself back down, now directly across from Asami in the semi-crowded booth. "You came just in time, we haven't ordered yet." Korra offered in a pleasant manner, trying to be nice. Cyan smiled. "Oh good, how have you been, Korra?" Cyan smiled at her, forgoing her menu for now in favor of talking to her. Korra smiled back, placing her index on her bottom lip and thought as she stared into space. Okay. Nothing really interesting has happened. I joined the Fire Ferrets after Naruto filled in for one of their teammates." Korra exclaimed, genuinely excited to be officially in a pro-bending team, though she hadn't had her first match yet. Cyan's brows rose and her face gained that hint of curiosity and interest in it that filled Korra's ego to a satisfying level. "Really? Good for you. I didn't think Tenzin would allow something like that." Korra smiled awkwardly, laughing in a meek manner until Naruto set down his menu, annoyed. "He hasn't yet. It just happened last night and Chairman Terlock was over this morning, so we didn't get to talk to Tenzin about it before they both left to their meeting. Sucks, but well," Naruto grinned, "we get the day off." Cyan nodded, laughing a little as Korra just looked down in apprehension as she thought about how she would break it to Tenzin. She hadn't been progressing in her airbending as fast as she had hoped, not even hoped, had expected to, and it was really getting to her that she couldn't. Had it not been for Naruto's constant reassurance and confidence in her, Korra wasn't sure if she wouldn't have quit by now. There were a lot of times she seriously questioned if she even needed airbending. Regardless, that wasn't what she should be worrying about right now. Asami seemed to have a question for her as Kuvira began to converse with Cyan and Badr Jr. "How was it? Naruto's match? I couldn't be there in person last night and only managed to catch the radio broadcast on it." Asami asked, folding her hands and resting her cheek on it lightly, staring into Korra's eyes in genuine interest. A part of Korra's chest pained slightly at the fact that Asami had asked about Naruto and not her, she was the avatar. But, well, Asami didn't know that. Barely anyone knew that. Oh, it was interesting. Nah, that really explained it well. It was great. He struggled at first, but suddenly it was like a switch flipped and it made sense to him. He calmed down real fast and he just pulled water out of the air like it was nothing. Shot a whole wave at the eels. Until last night I didn't even know he could do that. Korra explained, smiling as she remembered Naruto's match. Naruto took this moment to pipe in. I didn't either. Kinda wish I did, but I can do it now, so who cares. Korra turned to look at him across the table, as did Saiyan and Badr Jr. Saiyan also seemed confused. Wait, you didn't know you could pull water from the air? Your mother could too, so it's not too much of a stretch to say you could. Naruto looked at her with that desperation that Korra was coming to hate, clinging onto her words with his eyes. She could. Saiyan reeled back in shock, and Badr Jr. narrowed his eyes though no one caught it. Korra leaned forward, intrigue exuding from her. Naruto never talked about his parents. You didn't know. Kushina was famous for it. The Uzumaki were famous for it. After they, passed, people were unsure if we'd ever see another waterbender quite like an Uzumaki. You seriously didn't know? Saiyan looked at him with wide eyes, and Naruto merely nodded as his brows furrowed. No, I didn't. I don't remember much about them. I didn't even know the Uzumaki were such a big deal until we got to Republic City. What even happened to them? Naruto asked with big gleaming eyes. The desperation in them seriously got to Korra. How could she not notice how much this mattered to him before? How much did he hide from her? And why? She could help. The fate of the Uzumaki is one of great mystery to it. Avatar Aang returned to Republic City with Kushina one day and announced that she was the last Uzumaki. Neither Aang or Kushina ever revealed publicly what had happened to the Uzumaki up in the north, and the north refuses to speak on the subject out of respect to their great clan. Tensions were high with the north for a few years because they wanted Kushina to return to the north, but eventually Avatar Aang managed to make peace with them. I had hoped you could shed some light on what happened to them, but it seems you can't. Badr Jr. explained, pushing his glasses up and staring at Naruto. Naruto looked as if he had been hit by a satomobile, slowly leaning away from the table and pressing his back into the booth deeply as he stared at the table. Korra wanted so desperately to reach over and give him a hug, but the damn table was in her way. Badr Jr. was blocking Kuvira from doing anything, and Asami was across the table from him. Even Saiyan seemed uncomfortable. The only one who didn't was Badr Jr. They're all gone. Does that mean I'm the last Uzumaki? The implications of Naruto's question left a dread across the table, and Korra's eyes widened a fraction at his words. He looked so sad. Badr Jr. however seemed unmoved. Yes. He told Naruto, staring at the blonde. Naruto nodded slowly, continuing to stare at the table. Actually, I was hoping you could answer a few questions for me, Naruto. Badr Jr. continued, prompting Naruto and the rest of the table to glance at him. Sure. Go ahead. Badr Jr. nodded, adjusting his glances briefly before linking his fingers together and setting his hands down on the table in front of him. I just want to know how, up until tonight, your identity as an Uzumaki was kept hidden from the world. It's strange to me. The police did not report a child on scene when they arrived, if I remember correctly. Korra found herself in a fumbling mess of confusion. What? She looked at Naruto, contemplating his parents as he seemed to be as well, but a hand rested onto the boy's shoulder, prompting Korra to look up and find herself staring into the eyes of that red-haired man, Kurama. He never seemed to leave them alone since last night. He was staring forward with a grim look. Doesn't matter. Kids and Uzumaki. Kurama's growl shook Korra to her core, her eyes glued to the man's face, as his eyes swept across the table before landing onto Naruto, his hands still resting on the boy's shoulder, in what looked to be an awkwardly comforting manner. Naruto stared up at him. You're Kurama, aren't you? What are you here for? Badr Jr. questioned with narrowed cautious eyes, nervously pushing up his glasses and looking at Kurama. The man patted Naruto's shoulder heartily before leaning across the table with a grin. Oh nothing, just gotta talk to Saiyan about the dance is all. Kurama's grin didn't sit well with Korra, nor anyone else at the table, but Saiyan stood up regardless, staring defiantly into the man's eyes, even as she stood above him due to his hunch across the table. The man looked up past his brows with an open-mouthed grin, before it tightened and became his trademark smirk as he rose up, placing his hands behind his back. Saiyan glared at him, crossing her arms. Whatever you have to tell me you can tell me here. Kurama's grin dipped slightly at her defiant words and tone of voice, before he narrowed his eyes and growled. There's some private matters we need to attend to as well. Please, Kurama gestured outwards with a charismatic smile, though the predatory look in his eyes threw it off, it'll only take a moment. Saiyan looked at him, and then back to Kuvira and Badr Jr., before sighing heavily and gesturing for Badr Jr. and Naruto to get up to allow her to leave. Korra watched as Kuvira got up and grabbed her arm first, worry evident in the soldier's eyes. I'll go with no. Kurama interrupted Kuvira, grinning even as she glared daggers at him. Korra got up quickly when she saw the metal on Kuvira's chest start to separate slightly. Grabbing Kuvira by the shoulder, Korra sat her down and reached her arm across her shoulder, whispering to her. Look, I don't like it either, but that guy's dangerous. I think we'd better play by his rules, for now at least. Kuvira looked at her with narrowed eyes and then back to Kurama and Cyan, before sighing and sitting down a little more comfortably, though she looked down with angry eyes at the table. Cyan patted her shoulder before stepping out of the booth and past an awkwardly standing Botter Jr. and a nervous Naruto, waving to them both with a comforting smile. Don't worry, I'll be back. Cyan told the group, striding away with Kurama. Naruto watched her go and went to sit down until Kuvira got up and pushed past him roughly. Kuvira. Stop. Hey. Naruto grabbed her arm and stopped her, but Kuvira turned around and tore his hand off of her wrist. You won't stop me. I won't let him hurt her. Kuvira snarled at Naruto, and the anger in her eyes briefly failed to mask over her deep concern, but Naruto caught it. He looked at her for a moment before stepping forward, leaning into her personal space. Look, I know you won't like it, but just hear me out. That guy, he works in secrecy. Everything about him is hidden. He wouldn't do anything to Cyan in the light of day. She'll be fine. Naruto watched as the anger in Kuvira's eyes faded slightly, but she still grit her teeth and flexed her jaw, going to turn around again, but Naruto stopped her. What? She growled at him through grit teeth, but Naruto looked past her and looked at where Kurama and Cyan were standing. They were near the bathrooms. Hey, I'm not saying there's nothing you can do. You could go over and listen, Naruto gestured to the bathrooms, they're by the bathrooms. You got an earthbending trick to make a hole or sense their vibrations of something. Naruto whispered to her, and he grinned slightly as he watched the gears work in her head. Instead of saying anything, Kuvira stepped forward and nodded slightly towards the group that were seated. Sorry guys, I'll be back, gotta use the bathroom. Listen, and listen well Bifong. Kurama's eyes narrowed and his arms as he stared into Cyan's own narrowed eyes. The meeting today, with the counselors. I promised you protection at the dance and all that. Cyan nodded cautiously, and Kurama smirked as his eyes glowed a deep orange. Good. I'll stand by my word. I plan to attend the dance even without providing protection. It's a good event, Cyan nodded graciously, though the tension did not leave the pair, but there's just one thing I've got an issue with. I know you heard about my connection to Naruto. You're his cousin or something, right? I heard you say he was your family. Cyan's tone was one of leverage, like she held the power in the conversation. Kurama figured it was good enough. He smirked at her. Yeah, we're cousins alright. Regardless, neither seemed to notice as a small hole opened up in the wall behind a painting near the two, Kuvira's ear on the other side of the hole. I'm gonna need you to forget everything about Naruto and me. Kurama's face dropped its usual smirk and his eyes glowed a little more intensely. Cyan would lie to herself and say she wasn't afraid, but she knew herself too well to do so. However, that didn't mean she wasn't brave enough to face the man and stand her ground. And what makes you think I'll do that? You can't kill me, my death would be too hard for you to cover up, as Lin seems to think you do for many deaths in Republic City. Cyan grinned, though it dropped as Kurama chuckled dryly, looking down and rubbing his forehead. First off, you're wrong. Second, you're only safe, Kurama gestured his fingers in air quotes, because you matter to Kuvira and Kuvira matters to Naruto. But beyond that. Nope. Heh, nope. Nada. Zilch. And, well, Kurama grinned, snapping his fingers. His grin stretched a centimeter more as he watched Cyan jump when a man dropped from the ceiling and gave Kurama a male pakage before disappearing again, Cyan looking around for him with wide, fearful eyes. You see Cyan, there's more than one way to get to a person. Kurama started with a sigh, tearing into the male pakage and grasping what was inside with his right hand, looking up to Cyan without a grin, but rather a lecturing face. You can threaten their life all you want, maybe rough them up a bit. Doesn't matter as much, it's all physical. Personal. But, Kurama held up a photo in his hands and grinned sadistically at the pure horror that bled into Cyan's face. Do anything to their family? Ho, they become putty in your hands. Kurama threw the bundle of photos at Cyan, who caught it with a reverent hand and rapidly pulled the rubber band off of them, scanning through them with growing horror. A few images were of Opal from suspicious angles, like she was being trailed. A few were of her husband Botter, a few more of her precious twins, and even a group devoted to her Hyun. The final photo was a group shot of masked men adorning all black at the sign that denoted Zaofu's borders. Cyan held back sobs of fear as she stared at the photo. But the meeting was this morning, how'd they get there so fast? That's impossible. Cyan muttered in question, looking up to Kurama with a new devastated level of fear. The man, however, didn't grin like she expected. Instead, he sighed heavily as if weight had been pressed onto his chest. He strode towards her and sat his hand on her shoulder, pulling her in closer to him and reaching his hand fully around her shoulders. I put man in Zaofu the moment I knew you were coming to Republic City. They arrived a week ago. Kurama explained with a grave tone of voice, looking at Cyan as she held back tears. He grimaced slightly, removing his arm from around her and reaching into his suit and pulling out a handkerchief, handing it to her. Don't worry. Seriously. Nothing's gonna happen to them. I needed insurance. You'd do anything for your family, right? Cyan nodded gravely, expecting him to make abhorrent demands, but instead Kurama smiled softly at her and looked down, his eyes narrowing and his brows furrowing in some sort of pain. Yeah, I would too. So, just don't tell anyone about Naruto and me, and nothing happens to them, okay? Kurama didn't smile as Cyan nodded, wiping her tears and sniffing as she regained her confidence slightly, and Kurama nodded at her, turning around and striding slowly out of the building. As soon as the man left, Badr Jr. came bolting from the booth, as did Kuvira from the bathroom. The pair immediately huddled around her, comforting her and trying to figure out what was going on. Mom, what happened? What are these faux spirits above? Badr Jr. mumbled out as his body became ice, and Kuvira looked panicked. What was he saying about Naruto? What's Naruto got to do with a monster like that? Kuvira whispered at the still recovering Cyan in a frantic manner, but Badr Jr. caught her words. Uzumaki's got something to do with this? Badr Jr. whispered to himself, staring at a photo of Opal's turned back in her room, before turning to Naruto with wide eyes and a slightly open mouth. Uzumaki's Badr Jr. mumbled to himself, looking back to the photos and finding his hands dangerously clenched. Cyan looked at Kuvira and Badr Jr. before pulling the both of them closer to her and closing her eyes strongly. She pulled them both in as if she would lose them. Listen, you two, ignore everything that just happened. Please. Don't worry. Badr Jr. and Kuvira looked up to her with wide, questioning eyes as if the woman had gone crazy. Cyan was beginning to think she might have. What? We've got to go to Zaofu. Put those men in prison. Make sure everyone's safe. Kuvira urged, pulling herself away from Cyan and gritting her teeth at her as she waved around a few of the photos that Badr Jr. hadn't grabbed. Cyan looked at her and frowned. No, that'll make it worse. Trust me, Kuvira. We need to ignore this, I'm begging you. Cyan bowed slightly to Kuvira, who was breathing heavily in her tension. She looked at Cyan, then to Badr Jr., and even back at the group at the table briefly, before returning to Cyan. She glanced at the photos in her hand once more, before breathing in heavily and exhaling, her body relaxing slightly as she did so, though it remained tense. Fine, we'll just focus on the dance. Kuvira muttered, walking closer to Cyan with a tense face. Cyan smiled thankfully at her, and pulled her into a hug. That's a good idea. A great one actually. Cyan tried to bring the energy that was usually present in her voice back, attempting to cheer up the two as she gestured upwards and clapped. I had this idea. Since this dance is all about welcoming the Avatar, Cyan had to stop herself from mentioning Korra and stop herself from shaking from the last vestiges of Kurama's threat. We should break tradition and include non-metal benders in the dance. Wouldn't that be great? We could have a bender from each discipline participate. Though, Cyan looked down and grasped her still shaking chin with shaky fingers and thought, it might be hard to get an airbender for it, Cyan awkwardly laughed, though Kuvira and Badr Jr. weren't looking at her. Kuvira was just looking down in thought, and Badr Jr. was staring at Naruto with new eyes. Cyan had never seen those eyes on Badr Jr. before, and she couldn't pinpoint their meaning. Regardless, Cyan was determined to comfort her family and pulled them both in close. I've got an idea. Naruto can be our waterbender. If he's anything like his mom, he'll be a great dancer. This caught Kuvira's attention at least, and Badr Jr. stiffened up and seemed to be paying more attention to her. Naruto? In the dance? Kuvira mumbled, looking down in serious contemplation. Cyan grinned, knowing full well why that caused Kuvira to perk up, and then brought the group back to the table, smiling when she saw that the food had arrived. Oh, we're back just on time. Kurama had beat the police by a whole 15 minutes. Blood was already on his hands the moment he heard of what had happened. 2 of his men, had been paid off. Were distracted by something else. That wasn't how it worked. No. No. Their only job was to make sure Kushina and Minato were safe. Make sure their kid was safe. That was all they had to do. They were getting paid triple, damn it. Kurama had heard of them being paid off before the news of Kushina's death hit him. He had been pulling his hand out of their stomachs when his messenger arrived. Kurama barely had the restraint to tell his messenger to run before he ran to the scene. As he rounded the corner to the alleyway, his mind went blank. Looking back, Kurama figured he had been more surprised than anything else. When he heard the news, he had expected that even the Earth's oceans would be considered a drop compared to the waves upon waves of murder that would roll off of his body. But he had been seized up by the sound of a breath. Small. Precious. Kurama's eyes had glanced at Kushina for the briefest of moments before settling permanently onto Naruto's small frame, his face bloodied slightly, but other than that there was no harm done to the boy. Kurama's feet had carried him forward slowly, deliberately. He had stepped over Minato's body and around Kushina's insides, before kneeling so very slowly next to Naruto's small frame. His hands hovered, unsure, above the boy before gently digging underneath his legs and chest, hoisting him onto Kurama's knees. Kurama breathed. He hadn't realized it, but he had held his breath since he came across the bodies. His breath was labored, choked. Kurama's face contorted into waves upon waves of grief. Sadness washed over Republic City. The mistress responded to Kurama's sadness, and a storm began over Republic City. Record-breaking. Lasted 3 weeks. Kurama pulled Naruto slowly to his chest, choking back a sob as he buried his face into the boy's hair, breathing. The boy's subtle warmth found its way into Kurama's chest slowly, and the man began to slowly stop shaking. That warmth began a spark, a tiny flame. In that moment, Kurama had considered it a replacement for the sparkling firework that had been Kushina in his chest, but when Naruto had returned to Republic City he had understood that they were different. Kushina's had been one of protectionary love, dutiful love. He had loved Kushina from a standpoint as something to be protected. But, Naruto had grown to be something different. Kurama could see it the moment the boy entered his den. He could see the way the boy's eyes refused to sit still, giving away his fear. But, his body did not shake. His voice did not quiver. And his face did not twitch. The boy was more like Kurama than Kushina had been. Kushina had been a lover, as all Uzumaki are, but she had not been very determined. Determination was a trait, but not a primary one. There were many venues that she had given up on. When something was difficult for Kurama's sister, she tended to lash out. But, Naruto was different. Like Kurama, determination became a primary trait of the boy's personality. And such, as Kurama watched the boy's eyes narrow and his eyes freeze when he handed the boy his mugshot of that monster back, Kurama could not stop himself from grinning. And, in that moment he had realized that the flames in his chest burned for different reasons. Kushina's burned out of a desire to protect what he cherished. Naruto's burned out of familial pride. Naruto found his attention pulled along by Badr Jr. as the boy practically jumped over him and began to run towards Zion. Shaking his head to rid the shock from his system, Naruto peered over his shoulder and past the booth to watch as Badr Jr. and Kuvira crowded Zion, worry and concern present across all parties. Naruto's eyes hardened to a degree, the corners of his mouth tightening. He watched as they conversed with each other, frantically. He could see the fear across Zion's frame, watched the way she resisted the shaking of her core. He watched as Kuvira and Badr Jr. were pulled into a hug, watched the way comfort poured across the group, and calmed them all slightly. His eyes briefly met Badr Jr.'s, and for a brief moment Naruto felt murder strike at his heart. But, it was drowned out by blood. Naruto quickly tore himself away from the scene and looked down shakily at the table, gritting his teeth and sharply inhaling as quietly as he could. Visions of his mother and father smiling at him were pushed to the forefront of his mind, and Naruto had to stop himself from shaking. Rapidly, he tore at the images until they were shredded, pieces floating away slowly until Naruto could think clearly again. Looking up, Naruto was surprised to find Asami's concerned face, Korra looking past him toward Zion's group. Asami seemed to lean forward to try and say something, but their waiter arrived with a grin looking to please, setting down their food on the table. Thanks. Naruto awkwardly laughed at the waiter, smiling. The man smiled to Asami before looking to Naruto with a brief look, turning away swiftly and leaving the group. Oh, we're back just on time. Zion's voice crashed into Naruto's ears, prompting the boy to turn and cast his eyes once more upon the family. He watched as Kuvira's eyes locked onto his with a serious look in them, as if she were thinking about something. Naruto, not used to such attention, awkwardly shot his eyes over to Badr Jr. and instead found dread flooding his system. Badr Jr.'s eyes held murder within them, and Naruto found his muscles tensing and the mistress's claws reaching down and cascading slowly across the length of his forearms, but Badr Jr. turned away, nodding to his mother. I'll be leaving. I've got some things to check up on. Badr Jr. gave no room for Zion to confront him, for he had already been striding away when he told her. The older woman watched him go before Naruto tapped her on the shoulder, gesturing to the table as he stood up, allowing Kuvira and her to sit down. She smiled in thanks. Oh, this looks delicious. Korra's excited squeal brought a smile to Naruto's face, his eyes softening and the tension in his muscles relaxing slightly, though he could still feel the way the mistress's claws flowed down his forearms in tantalizingly slow motions. Naruto fought to ignore her with all his being. He could feel the purest form of desire rolling off of her in waves. It was aimless, unfocused. She did not want anything in particular, just something. This feeling had been growing from her aura since he had connected with her, and Naruto was hard-pressed to continue ignoring it. Regardless, he did. I'm glad you think so, I'll bet it tastes better than it looks. Asami's reply made Naruto smile, and he looked down to his own food with a keen eye. They had ramen, so it was an obvious choice. But, it was different. It looked exquisite, to be sure, but there was something missing about it that Naruto could not describe. Deciding he was being crazy, Naruto snapped his chopsticks and readied himself to try them. Korra leaned forward, as did Kuvira, prompting Naruto to look up with a quizzical look. What? He asked, raising his brow comically as genuine confusion tugged at his face. Well, you're having ramen. And you couldn't stop going on and on and on about Ichiraku's ramen, so, Korra began, looking at him with intense eyes, and Kuvira stood up, planting her hands on the table with a serious look, we're unbelievably interested in how you like this ramen. She finished for Korra, the avatar nodding in confirmation. Saiyan and Asami looked at the two like they were crazy, yet they peered over at Naruto with curiosity brewing as well, caused by the over-the-top reactions from the girls. Naruto coughed awkwardly, smiling at them shakily before looking down to the bowl in front of him. He looked up at them once more, receiving a nod and a grunt from Kuvira, before he sighed and stuck his chopsticks in, pulling out a small bundle of noodles and even a piece of fish. Kuvira leaned in slightly, as did Korra, but Naruto ignored them, staring intently at the bundle at the end of his chopsticks. Naruto opened up, promptly placing the ramen bundle in his mouth and snapping it closed, dramatically closing his eyes and chewing slowly. He furrowed his brow, humming to himself before swallowing, his eyes staying closed. So? How was it? Korra and Kuvira wasted no time demanding his reaction, to which the boy opened his eyes, staring at the bowl intensely. He thought he figured out what was missing, but, seeing Asami and remembering that she was hosting, Naruto decided to under-exaggerate. Yay. That was it. It's good. I'd say it's on par with Ichiraku's. Naruto stated seriously, closing his eyes and nodding to himself in confirmation. Korra and Kuvira sighed, slumping back in a disappointed manner before attending to their own food. Naruto meanwhile picked up his chopsticks again and began to eat, though slower than he would Ichiraku's ramen. He had figured out what was missing, familiarity. The feeling of a group effort. The routine that could only come from frequent meetings. He had missed the familiarity of the Ichirakus. Regardless, the food was still good. So Saiyan, that guy said you had a dance, right? What's that about? Asami asked, staring at the older woman with curious eyes. Naruto glanced between the pair, looking down at his food and eating slowly. Saiyan smiled at the younger girl, and Kuvira perked up as well, a small smile on the soldier's face, even as she tore into her steak. I'm glad you asked. I forgot I haven't actually officially announced it yet, oopsies. Saiyan laughed, covering up her hand as the corners of her eyes crinkled. Anyway, my dancers from Zeofu will be doing their very first recital outside of Zeofu. To celebrate the Saiyan stopped briefly, looking down in consideration, before smiling and shaking her head, to celebrate the avatar. Saiyan announced with pure joy on her face. Everyone at the table could see the unrestricted passion on her face, and Naruto was lying if he said it didn't make his chest swell slightly. Happiness was infectious it seemed. Asami's mouth dropped open in surprise, before her face stretched to a wide smile. You're doing a Zeofu dance here in Republic City. Ooh, I thought I was gonna have to travel there one day to see one. That's great. Asami exclaimed excitedly, Saiyan and Asami staring at each other with excitement in their eyes. But, that brings up a good question. Asami interrupted, resting her elbow on the table and pointing her index and middle fingers upwards as an indicator. You guys ever wonder who the avatar is? What their personality's like? Asami looked at the table with a cheeky smile on her face, closing her eyes and sighing haughtily. Other people are more concerned about how they plan to deal with the equalists and other problems around the world, but me? Asami opened her eyes, pointing at her chest with her thumb, even as Naruto shot a subtle glance to Korra, who seemed to be hanging on to Asami's every word. I care more about their taste in music. I wonder what they like. Maybe classical. I heard the avatar is supposed to be pretty spiritual, so I don't know if they'd like something like jazz. Makes you wonder, you know. Asami finished with a small chuckle, and Naruto watched as Korra's chest began to puff out, a cheeky smirk spreading on her face. Yay, you know, the avatar's probably not gonna show their face for a while. Naruto interrupted Korra quickly, acting as if it was an offhand comment, looking down and chewing his food, before looking up at Asami's waiting face. He pretended to ignore the way Korra childishly glared at him with puffed out cheeks. What? It's only been 17 or so years since Aang died, right? I doubt they've got all the elements mastered, and besides, Naruto slurped up a few noodles before sighing, looking upwards with a smirk on his face as he glanced at Korra. I heard that those White Lotus guys that are supposed to protect the avatar go a little overboard. Korra laughed and Kuvira chuckled, but Asami looked at Naruto and nodded slowly, seemingly in thought, before sighing and leaning back into the booth, looking up. I guess you're right. I just kinda wanna meet them and decide for myself if they're good enough to be this. Asami gestured outwards with a sort of jazz hands-like movement, mystical savior of life and protector of everything good that everyone seems to be hyping them up to be. I mean, has anyone ever thought about what would happen in the Avatar up and decided that the world we have now needs to be erased? Follows in the footsteps of Fire Lord Sazin. Asami pondered to herself, but Naruto watched with concerned eyes at the way Korra's eyes widened and she crushed inward on herself. That'll never happen. Naruto called out, chewing lackadaisically on his noodles and looking up at Asami, glancing over at Korra to make sure she was paying attention to him. Call it a hunch, but I'm sure the Avatar's a great person. I think they just need some time to make sure they're ready for the job they've got. Naruto finished and held back a smile at the way Korra's face relaxed. Kuvira smiled softly, as did Cyan, both earthbenders knowing the subtlety of his answer, while Asami considered what he said. Well, regardless, I'm more interested in this dance you've got right now. When's it gonna be? Asami switched subjects, turning over and looking intensely into Cyan's eyes, the passion in them matching Cyan's own. Cyan smiled at seeing that. In about a month or so. I was thinking, to celebrate the Avatar, I might see if I can get benders from each discipline to dance in the recital. You know, to emphasize the piece the Avatar represents, and obviously their ability to bend the four elements. And, to that regard, Cyan turned to look at Naruto, a smile on her face. You think you could fill the role of a waterbender for me, Naruto? Naruto choked on his noodles, coughing harshly as he punched his chest. Naruto set down his chopsticks after he managed to rein in his coughs, taking a deep breath before looking at Cyan. What? Me I don't know my left foot from my right and you expect me to be able to dance? Naruto's outburst made the table laugh at him like it was a joke, but Naruto folded in on himself. It wasn't a joke. Of course I do. Your mother was amazing at it, so I'm sure at least some of it was passed down onto you. Plus, you've got Kuvira right here to help you. Cyan offered, throwing her arm around Kuvira's shoulder and shaking the girl, who looked at Naruto with invested eyes. Yeah, don't worry about it, Naruto. I'll help you. Kuvira urged, staring into the boy's eyes and focusing on the sky within them. Naruto, however, began to feel cornered. I don't know. Oh come on Naruto. It's a dance for the Avatar. You should do it. Ha 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 ha. Korra laughed at him, a malicious teasing glint in her eye that Naruto detested all the way back from when he was nearly 7. Groaning, Naruto slammed his head on the table and refused to pull it up. Fin. Naruto moaned out and the table cheered. End chapter. So this part ends here. If you want to see next part of this series, like the video now and share the story with your friends. Bye bye.